Tonight we are here to hear from Robert Berry, or as we all affectionately know him, Bob. I go drinking with Bob, and Bob is a really great guy. I've learned a lot about him. I've learned a lot about his family and what they're doing and how they're serving the nation. And he's come up with some very fantastic ideas that I think are really going to serve this nation well. Bob has spent a little bit of time, or probably quite a bit of time, researching Article 5 and the Conventions of States projects, so maybe he'll update us on that also. But the thing I wanted to bring him here to talk to you all about is Bitcoin. It's something that he picked up a long time ago and has really grown into it. And I think that the implications are much more exciting than just the details on Bitcoin. I think that the way that it's going to affect markets and the fact that it's a pure currency with so many virtues is something that I'm very excited to see it, to have this come up. So Bob Berry is a Broomfield resident, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Bob Berry.
The title I gave this talk is Cryptocurrencies, a Pinprick to the Heart of State. Okay, I think that's pretty descriptive. So this is a huge topic. It's a little daunting. This is a topic that my friends, Mike has heard this. This is the topic that I torment my friends with. So they've heard bits and pieces of this thing to the point where they're ready to blow their brains out. They're so sick of hearing this. So this is a time I want to kind of start at the beginning and spend a little bit of time. We're going to have a little bit of technology, a little bit of economics, and a fair amount of anarchy. Okay, and whenever I use the term anarchy, now you guys in this group know what I mean by anarchy. Not for the people watching in YouTube, we're not talking about the people who show up at the WTO and the G20 and they throw Molotov cocktails. That's not what we're talking about. Besides, they're communists. They only say they're anarchists and only proves that they lie. So, so anarchy is a little different thing. So let me give you kind of an intro on this. I feel very much like I've been transported back to 1993. And in 1993, I was on the internet. This is the pre-browser internet. We didn't have really much other than email, and we were all geeked out about email. I mean, it sounds kind of silly now, but we thought it was the best thing we'd ever seen in our lives. And we know the rest is history, right? So the people who were excited about that, who kind of got it on the ground floor, everybody was later said, oh, yeah, that. Well, we were there in the very beginning, and so all the opportunities, if you were one of these people who was kind of hip to the whole internet thing in 1993, and you missed some opportunities back then, I'm going to suggest that you've got a bigger, as big if not bigger, I believe it's actually bigger opportunity in the new world of cryptocurrency. Okay, so that's kind of my teaser, and I really do believe that. That's a very big statement, but I do believe it. So I want to kind of start off, the way I want to approach this tonight is kind of like the movie The Karate Kid. You ever see The Karate Kid? Okay, so you remember wax on, wax off, and he's teaching this kid how to do all these things, you know, right to circle, left to circle, paint fence, up, down, sand the floor, and the kid had no idea what he was doing, and he was like, what is all this about? What he was doing is he's building muscle memory, and then later on, he realized that, hey, he knew karate, okay, or at least some of the basics. So we're going to do a little bit of that. I'm going to get into a couple different areas, 2 or 3 areas, and you're going to think that I've lost my mind. You're going to say, what does this have to do with anything? And then in the end, I'm going to tie them all together, and you're going to say, oh, now I get it, okay? So the first thing, so this is kind of wax on, wax off, okay? I'm going to talk about central banks, okay? Now, in here, I guess, you know, I have to sort of tailor my remarks, as I would imagine a lot of people in here in libertarian circles, we kind of know what central banks are, right? Can anybody name, just give me one central bank?
Federal Reserve.
Federal Reserve. Can anybody name another one? Which one? Okay. How about the European Central Bank, the ECB? Is that what you said? Okay, I thought you said Deutsche Bank. Okay. Because I was like, that's not one anymore. We've got my two, huh? Okay, cool. Bank of England. Okay, so these are all central banks. People Bank of China. These are all central banks. So central banks are kind of the banks behind the banks that we see. Okay, you don't exactly drive up with a drive-through window at a central bank. Pretty much what distinguishes a central bank is that's pretty much the currency of that country. Usually, you can trace back to a central bank. So in our case, if you take out your currency in your wallet, that's a Federal Reserve note. That's our central bank. It's a Federal Reserve. So the problem with Federal Reserve, with central banks, is they're controlled by human beings. And so when you have a monetary system, when you have a system that's issuing currency, and there are human beings involved, it's subject to all the frailties that we have being human beings. So generally speaking, we, from the libertarian mindset, we follow, usually you've heard the term probably Austrian economics, and we're very big into sound money, and usually we're talking about some kind of a commodity-based money system. And for a long time in our country, on and off, but for a long time in our country, up until really August 15th, 1971, we were on very close to a gold standard. And so what's good about a gold standard is, theoretically, you can't really print gold. So the idea is if your currency has a relationship to that commodity, you can't just destroy your currency. And so let's back up. How do you destroy a currency? You print too much of it, right? So we've seen this. We all know from history. We all know the story of Weimar Germany when they were carrying around their money in wheelbarrows. You had to be very careful not to leave your money, even a few feet away in a wheelbarrow, because somebody might dump the money out of it and steal the wheelbarrow. Okay, that's how worthless it became. All right. So another little show and tell. I'm going to pass this around. So here's another more recent example of this. Anybody know what this is? I know somebody in here. Yeah, your ads are so good. I just love you guys. This is like, I don't even have to. Can I just sit down now? I'm going to pass this around. I better get this back. This is a lot of money. This is $10 trillion Zimbabwe, and I've actually got a $100 trillion note at home. But that's so much money, I don't want to take that out of the house. All right, so I'm going to pass this thing around. So they actually set the record for just adding zeros. So for instance, if you went back to Italy, is another good example of this. And if you were in Italy in, say, like the late 80s or something like that, you'd buy a candy bar, maybe a pack of gum or something like that, and they would say, okay, that'll be 497,000 lira, right? And this is how it is. So this is what happens when you destroy your currency. We've seen this in a lot of countries. Weimar Germany, Argentina, for the fourth time in my lifetime, is setting about destroying their currency. So they're just printing it. They've got about a 30% inflation rate. And so let me talk about how that happens. When you print, it's kind of like when you put a lot of ice in a drink. So you got a Coca-Cola, put a lot of ice in there, and it dilutes. You're losing the effectiveness of that Coca-Cola. All right. Same thing with money. If you print a lot of money or you create it digitally today, you're going to lose the value. It's going to take more of it. And this is the situation we ended up with in the 60s in this country, is that even though we were supposed to be on a gold standard, in actuality, we were quietly printing money like there was no tomorrow. And the result of that was around the world, because we do have the international reserve currency, around the world, the value that dollar was able to buy was diminishing. It was diminishing significantly. But back then, a country, or actually at one point even individuals, later institutions, and then later at the very end of this, countries, could still go to the Federal Reserve, and they could redeem these notes for gold. And so what happened is, the Federal Reserve was caught in a box. They had to pretend that the price of gold was still worth $35 an ounce, and when it wasn't. And so you had France in particular was all over this. So they weren't just cashing in their dollars. They were getting a hold of every dollar they could possibly find, and they were bringing it right to the Federal Reserve, and they were essentially doing what the Federal Reserve said they were going to do. That was supposed to keep the Federal Reserve honest, and it didn't. So if you ever wonder what happened with the oil crunch in the early 70s, it wasn't because the Arab nations were jacking the price just to be mean. They had to jack the price up because the dollars that were being used to pay for their product were less valuable. Okay, so this is the problems you get into, you see, when you're tampering with your currency. So the point is that when people are involved in currency, when people can make decisions, that can be a real problem for a currency. Okay. The banking sector today, we had a real close call in 1978. One of my arguments is we're in a worse situation now with the banks than we were in 2008. One of the reasons, you see one reason that is, the banks now are being actually encouraged to buy U.S. treasuries, a lot of 10-years that they're buying. And they're buying these treasuries by taking money out of the Federal Reserve on the overnight discount rate, which is basically 0%. Okay? So if you look at a 10-year treasury and you say, who would buy a 10-year treasury that's yielding, what are they yielding now, like 2.5 or something, or just maybe around 3 at the most? Has it ever occurred to you who's going to buy a 10-year anything that's yielding 3%, especially when inflation is higher than that? Why would anybody do that? Let me tell you who would do that. If you can get your money, no strings attached, through the Federal Reserve at 0, then you can buy something yielding 2.5 or 3. You got a 3% carry there. You got a profit. And that's not a bad little business to be in, isn't it? except for one little problem. It breaks the first rule of banking, which is you never borrow short and lend long, which is what they're doing. Eventually, what's going to happen is they're going to lose control of interest rates. It's a whole other talk. But you're going to see something that economists call regression of the mean, and which that means is interest rates are going to want to go back to where they are comfortable. And that means that whole process is going to invert. So instead of a 2.5% to 3% carry, that's going to be a negative. But that's not the bad news. The bad news is, what happens to the value of your bonds when interest rates go up? Okay. So now you got a problem, because now your bonds are worth 50 or 60 cents on the dollar, and you're insolvent in 24 hours. And so this is the situation that we have. So this is there's a popular show on, everybody watches House of Cards. This is the real House of Cards. This is a real problem, and this is coming down the pike. So I want you to take that, and I want you, remember, we're doing the Karate Kid thing. Park that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Okay? The next one. I want to talk about the internet. We talked about the internet from 1993, how cool it was. I remember telling all my friends they got to get email. Email is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. We didn't have the browser yet. I thought, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I had people who thought I was out of my mind. And they were saying, so wait, let me get this straight. Hold on a second. So I'm going to send an email. So first of all, I got to sign up to some kind of a service. And I got to pay like a monthly fee for some internet service provider. And then I got to go and turn my computer on. See, back then, we didn't leave. It's hard to imagine this now. We didn't leave our computers on. Do you remember this? Our computers were off. It was like, it's kind of, I don't know if some people are old enough in here remember. Do you remember you used to have to warm up your television set? Remember this? And I remember getting a TV when I was a kid in the 70s. Yeah, it was a black and white TV. You know what it said in the box in huge letters? It said instant on. Remember that? Instant on. I was telling all my friends, I got this instant on television. So computers weren't instant on. You didn't leave them on. So you had to turn your computer on. Then you had to make a phone call with your computer. Then you had to, remember that? Ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung. And then it would hook up, and then you'd open a program, you'd make an email, you'd say whatever you're going to send, and then the person you're sending it to, A, had to have email, which is like 1 in a million, okay? And B, they had to repeat that same process on the other side. I mean, it sounded completely nuts to anybody. Why would anybody do that? And I remember saying with all kinds of conviction exactly what I'm going to be saying here tonight about Bitcoin, saying, this is the best thing I've ever seen in my life, and they thought I was absolutely nuts. What happened? 2 or 3. In fact, I remember specifically saying that this is going to replace first-class mail, and I said it's going to do it within 10 years. This is 1993. I said by early 2000s, first-class mail is going to be history, and I think that really started kicking in really the late 90s. So that actually happened, and it came in with a vengeance towards the late 90s. It doesn't mean I'm a big visionary. What it means is, if you kind of understand what the technology is and what it's replacing, it's not that hard to draw those lines out and say, okay, well, this is going here. Okay? Not hard to do. So I feel very much like that now. So I want you to get kind of in the mindset of 1993. So let's get a little further down the timeline. And does anybody here remember Napster? Remember Napster? Okay, so Napster, for those of you guys who don't know, that was a file sharing program. So what you did back then is you bought these CDs with all these songs on them, and then you ripped them, and you had the songs, and you had them on your hard drive, and then if you're really cool, yeah, well, you give them to your friends, so if you're really cool, you get an MP3 player. And these things were about, little boxes. I had one that was in the shape of a pen, and it was really cool, and it would just barely hold maybe like 1 album's worth of MP3s, and I could listen to it. It was so cool. I thought this was the best thing I'd ever seen. And then Napster came along. And Napster, you could share your files with other people, and so you could get their music, and they can get your music, and it was really cool, except for the record companies didn't think it was very cool. And they got the government to think that it wasn't very cool. And they sicked the government on Napster, and what happened to Napster? It went down like a ton of bricks. That was the end of Napster. So no more Napster. So in biology, we talk about viruses mutating, and certain viruses have different fitness factors, right, to overcome whatever it is so they can survive. So Napster mutated, and it mutated into a completely different thing. The thing that killed Napster was it had a single point of failure. So it was very easy for the government to go, oh, you're the guy. You're out of business, pal. No more for you. So what does it seem like the fitness factor should be? Well, maybe there shouldn't be a single point of failure. So something called BitTorrent was born. And BitTorrent turns 11, I think, this year. So it's been going on for 11 years. So about 2003, BitTorrent. So BitTorrent was kind of like Napster, But instead of having a single point of failure, everybody was on this thing, this decentralized network. And if I wanted to download a song, I might get little bits and pieces from 1,000 different computers, and my computer reassembles it on my computer. It's like a little mini tornado somewhere in the world of bits that I need, and my computer can grab them. At the same time, I'm throwing bits out into the world that they need, and there's no way, and the government said, we're going to shut this down, we're going to kill it, and they can't. They couldn't. In fact, it's been going for 11 years. How does something last 11 years, and they haven't been able to lay a glove on it? It's because they can't. They can't touch it. So they can huff and they can puff, but there's nothing they can do about it. It's over for that. Somebody told me that 25% of the traffic on the internet is BitTorrent. And of course, the other part about this is it's not all illegitimate file sharing. A lot of people it's an efficient way to distribute very large files. So now it's indistinguishable, the nefarious transactions of people stealing music and people just exchanging PDFs, of whatever, whatever open source thing they want to exchange. So the decentralized aspect of that, very, very important. The government and the record industry were basically screwed on that one, and you had a long period of more or less coexistence between. See, now I don't even download my music with BitTorrent anymore because they made it so cheap. I just buy for $1 or whatever it is on iTunes. It's just clickety click and I've got it. So it's coexisting. Okay, another very important point. All right. So the next one, that's going to seem completely unrelated. We're going to talk about encryption. All right, now this is where, if you're not a tech guy or gal, you're going to say, well, I'm going to sit this one out. This is easy to understand. This is super, super easy to understand. So let me take you back to World War II. World War II, the Germans had this amazing device. It looked like a typewriter. It was called Enigma. I'm sure everybody has seen these World War II movies where they're using the Enigma, right? You know what the Enigma is? And the way this thing would work is it had these wheels, and you dial in today's code, whatever today's code is, and it's kind of like a password. And then you type a message in there, Mary had a little lamb, whatever it is in German. And it comes out the other end in an unscrutable bunch of letters. And then you have your Morse code guy send that message to somewhere else, and they got the same settings on their machine, and then they take that and they just do the reverse of that process, and they've got the message. Mary had little lamb in German. Okay? Easy. So this is just like a password. So if you have any account that you use, and you have a password, you give it to anybody, and they can basically see all your stuff. Okay? And that's the problem with it. Because once they cracked a password for the day, or once they really cracked the way the machine thought, which is what they did, the English did this at Bletchley Park, they had every message that had ever been sent, because even before they cracked these codes, they were taking them all down. Okay? So that's essentially just a single cipher encryption machine. Okay? Fast forward to the mid-'70s or so, and one of the most amazing inventions that we've ever had, certainly in the realm of computer science, was invented, and this is public key encryption. Public key encryption is where, instead of me sharing a password with you, you have something called a public key. It's kind of like your email address, okay? And I'm going to send you a scrambled message, but there's only going to be one person on the face of the earth who can unscramble that message, because I'm using your public key. You have a corresponding private key that you keep to yourself. That's why it's called a private key. So the public key you share, and when I want to send you an email message, I'm going to send it to you. After I scramble that message, even I can't read that message. It's quite amazing. Once I send it, only one person can read it, and that's you, because you've got the private key to read it. And if you want to respond to me, you're going to do the reverse of that process. You're going to scramble a message using my public key, which I have a corresponding private key for, and I'm going to use my private key to decode the message you sent to me. Okay? Not so hard. Okay? Put that in the back of your mind. We will come back to that in a moment. Let's talk about private currencies. Tim and I were just talking about this a moment ago. Man, this probably goes back more than 10 years, but I remember a couple of private currencies. One was called eGold. Anybody remember eGold or Liberty Dollar? And so these are private currencies. They said, look, you don't have to ride this freight train to hell, with the Federal Reserve. You can, escrow money with us, and we'll give you these electronic certificates. And it's kind of like a barter currency. And then, of course, that lasts for about, maybe 6 months. and then they're accused of money laundering, and the government comes in with their, with their ninja suits on, and they batter the door down, and pretty much what happened to Napster happens to these private currency companies, and they always accuse them of being a Ponzi scheme. Sometimes they probably were Ponzi schemes, okay? Maybe sometimes they were totally honest, but they were always, the catch-all phrase, the pretext is always money laundering, okay? By the way, if you've been watching this range war situation here the last few days, okay, so there's always a pretext for these things, okay? Do you know, I'm sure in here somebody does. Do you know what the pretext was for this whole range situation out there in Nevada? It was about turtles. I call them turtles. I am not going to call them tortoises or tortoise. Maybe so, but I like calling them turtles. So there's always a pretext. So the pretext of these, the way they kill these private companies that were doing this is they said, well, you guys are money laundering, you're a bunch of criminals, and we're going to charge you, we're going to throw the book at you, okay? Same exact problem that Napster had. Single point of failure, okay? So 2008 comes and goes. We had the banking crisis, and there was a guy or group of people, a team of engineers, most likely, in my opinion. You've heard the term Satoshi Nakamoto, and they came up with this idea of something called a decentralized cryptocurrency. This is where I'm putting it all together now, okay? So what they did was they created this thing. I want to actually back up a step. One of the things that's really interesting about the Internet is who owns the Internet? Well, see, nobody really. Yeah, there you go. She owns the Internet. Nobody owns the Internet. The Internet runs on a protocol. So a protocol is just a bunch of computer code. That's actually open source computer code. So if you wanted to make your own little Internet in your house, you can actually make your own little Internet. You use the same thing. It's called TCP/IP, and that's a protocol. It's kind of interesting, huh? Right, and that's right. Those are privately owned, but the code itself is completely free. Okay, so when you think about it, even the English language is a protocol, right? Think about that. The international language of commerce is English, and while we're on the topic, the international currency of commerce is the U.S. dollar. Very important. So this team had this idea. They said, well, we're going to create a money protocol, and they created Bitcoin, and it's really quite an amazing thing. I want you to think of Bitcoin as not money for the internet, like a lot of people do. It's really an internet of money. It's a protocol. That's what it is. And so they created this thing. And remember our talk here about what makes a good currency. Are human beings involved, or is there a commodity? You can't just make gold. Okay. Well, they said we can actually kind of reproduce the characteristics of gold electronically. And so that's what they did. They took all the characteristics of gold, and here's the very important part about this, is that a currency or anything will command a price in the market, which is necessary if you're going to be a currency. It has to be scarce, and it has to be valuable. Okay? So for instance, gold commands a price in the market because it's scarce and it's desirable, right? People could use it for different things. Same thing with silver, pretty much all the metals. You can say that about lumber, right? Lumber doesn't make a very good currency. It's a little bulky, but it commands a price in the market. Okay, a cubic yard of air. Okay, air is very useful, but it's not exactly scarce, so it doesn't command a price in a market. Okay, a three-eyed fish is rare, but nobody wants any. Right, so it doesn't command a price in the market. Okay. So if you have something that's desirable or very useful that is also scarce, now you've got something that commands a price. And so if you've been wondering why Bitcoin is holding a particular value, and of course it's quite volatile, it's because it's useful and because it is scarce. Now, here's where we cross the Rubicon here a little bit. You could take a 1,000 years of monetary theory, and pretty much the idea would be for sound money, you had to have it backed by some kind of a commodity. Okay, it had to be gold, it had to be silver, it had to be something. Okay, or today we have fiat currencies that are basically backed by the government says use that, and it's backed up, I guess, by the military. I don't know. It's they say that's kind of the what they call the subjective theorem of money. I don't want to get into that too much. What's interesting about Bitcoin to me is that there is no commodity backing it. But in actuality, there is something quite valuable backing it, and that is a service. Bitcoin actually has a service that makes it very, very valuable. And that service is the ability to transmit it anywhere in the world in seconds. And well, 10 minutes for an actual authentication, but as far as letting you know I sent you the money, that's almost instantaneous. So I can send that money, I can project that money anywhere in the world, and in that sense, it actually is superior to gold because you can send it anywhere. If I'm going to pay my landscaper in cash or in gold or whatever it is, that's kind of limited to a hand-to-hand transaction, isn't it? But if I want to buy some product that's made, like for instance, a good example I like to talk about use cases for Bitcoin. If I wanted to buy some this kente cloth that they make only in like a handful of countries in Africa, well, a lot of those countries are in places that have been cut off from the outside world. So I can't use Visa or MasterCard to buy this from them. And if you're the guy in that has that good, you're cut off from the outside world. So we're both kind of screwed, okay? But with Bitcoin, I can send him money. He can establish a reputation as fulfilling orders. I can get my product. I'm not buying a car here. I'm buying $20 worth of kente cloth, okay? And so the idea is I can pay him. And I actually have a real-world example of this. So I had some logos done for me. I use a company called 99 Designs. It's really kind of cool. You have like a contest. You pay $500. They escrow it. And then people from all over the world compete to give you the best logo. And then you pick a winner. And then once you're satisfied, you get all the files, you hit the button saying, everything's cool, I got my files, and then they release the money. They take a small fee, and the guy who submitted the designs gets paid. Okay, so I've done a lot of these. And I've had people in Pakistan, and I had a guy in Russia, but I had one guy in Belarus who won one of these. And I liked it so much, I actually had the guy do some additional work for me. And so when I went to pay him, I figured that he was using PayPal, because PayPal's a lot of international remittances. And he said, no, I can't get PayPal either. And I said, well, how in the world am I going to pay you? He says, well, how'd you get paid from 99 Designs? And he said, well, Western Union. I said, Western Union? What kind of fee do they charge you? Does anybody want to take a wild guess what kind of fee Western Union charged this guy? 15%? It was 20%. Okay? So the next time I paid the guy, I paid him with Bitcoin. Okay? He got it in a matter of seconds. Okay, he had it. He was able to. I don't know. He was able to convert it to his local currency, or just use it in whatever way he wants to use it. He had that in seconds, and the fee. I could send $100,000 to somebody if I wanted to, and the fee would be like less than $1. Okay, so that's the power. So that's what makes Bitcoin useful. That's what gives it. I think it's. I'm very careful about saying intrinsic value, but that's what gives it its utility value. Okay, so. Let's talk about, I want to go into a little bit of the technicals on this thing. So it's a protocol. It's running on computers all over the world. So it's actually the largest distributed computing program ever. So I don't know if anybody's ever participated in something called SETI, which was one of the original distributed computers where you're searching for extraterrestrial life. Just for the record, I haven't done that. Okay. But that was kind of a cool experiment because your computer would do some kind of routine. It would function as one large computer. Well, that's exactly how Bitcoin is designed to do. So you have all these computers, and now they're getting to be extremely powerful. They're using something called ASICs, which are application-specific integrated circuits, which basically do one thing and one thing only. And that is the way transactions are approved on the Bitcoin network. It's just like, for instance, if I go to a deli and I buy a sandwich from my deli, they're going to scan my debit card, and it's going to check and say, yeah, Bob's got the money, and you can sell him the sandwich. Okay? With Bitcoin, it's similar to that, but you've got all these privately owned computers using an open source protocol, okay, very important, but just like the man said a minute ago, the computers are all privately owned, and they're all participating voluntarily running this protocol. And what they're doing is they're all competing to solve a math problem. And here's how this works. When I have a transaction, that is put into a block of other transactions, okay, and essentially, all these computers are banging apart that block trying to solve a math problem. All over the world, tens of thousands of computers are trying to solve a single math problem. And within 10 minutes, because the system is designed to work in 10-minute intervals, one computer solves the problem. And when they solve the problem, they say bingo. They say, I got it. I got the solution, and here's my proof. And then they send what's called a hash, and that all the other computers can take that hash and they can test to make sure that this person actually did solve the riddle. And if they do, that just keeps on getting confirmed and confirmed and confirmed and confirmed. And so you have an authorized transaction. What's so important about this is that is how the integrity of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem is maintained. So you have these individual computers are called miners, okay? And their motivation for doing this is they get a small transaction fee for authorizing these transactions, okay? But they also get, every time they solve one of these problems, they get 25 new Bitcoins are born into the world, okay? And Bitcoins live in this database that is called the blockchain. I'm getting a little technical, I know. So once you have, I want you to imagine a computer ledger, okay, that's distributed all over the world, tens of thousands of computers, all keeping track of every single transaction that is ever done. But the one thing it doesn't know is who is doing the transactions. So if I were to send you money or anybody money, it's basically anonymous. I could be sending money to somebody in this room, or I could be sending it to Japan or China or anywhere else. And now we start getting into the economic aspects of this. So let's talk a couple more of these use cases. We already talked about international remittances. It seems that the people, there's a lot of people who are in third world countries who are migrant workers to first and second world countries. I just had a very good friend who was in Costa Rica recently, and he said there were a lot of people there from Nicaragua who were working there, and they make their money, and then they send a lot of it home. Probably the majority of it goes home. But prior to now, they were stuck having to Western Union this money or some other thing, which is very, very high fees. Now they can send this money back, and one of the countries that's really affected by this is Argentina. Argentina has they've erected something called capital controls. We've just begun to see capital controls in our country. Is anybody familiar with the term capital controls? Okay, so capital controls is kind of like a Berlin Wall for money. It says you can leave the country, but your money is staying right here. Okay, and usually they're phased in. So 6 to 9 months ago in Argentina, one of the tricks that people would do is, Argentina is one of those countries that has a two-class society. So you either have a lot of money or you're dirt poor. Okay, so the people with a lot of money are trying to get it out of the country. They're trying to get it into something that's going to hold its value, because if they leave it in Argentine pesos, they're going to lose 30% of the value a year, okay, at least. Okay, so their objective is it's like a hot potato. They want to get rid of it. So at the same time, you have a lot of other people living in Argentina whose husband or father is working in maybe Nicaragua, okay, and they're earning whatever that local currency is. These people can convert that local currency to Bitcoin, send it down to Argentina. The guys in Argentina who want to get out of pesos can sell those pesos to the people who now have the Bitcoin, so they're happy. And so here this guy who's making the pesos in Argentina is getting rid of the pesos. Several months ago, one of the techniques they did was they would buy a stock on the Argentine stock market, like maybe Coca-Cola, okay? And then they would sell those shares on the New York Stock Exchange, and they would sell for dollars, and then those dollars would go into an American bank account. So a lot of people who have money in Argentina have foreign bank accounts, and it's really interesting because you could do real estate transactions like that. So let's say that I'm a rich guy and you're a rich guy, and you've got a $500,000 condo you want to sell me. We would sit down with a lawyer, and he would do the transaction, but all the money would flow between our bank accounts in the United States or some other country. Well, now I know somebody who's actually witnessed a transaction actually in a restaurant. I don't know why they do these things in restaurants, but he witnessed a guy taking his phone out, because this is how you can actually spend Bitcoin on a smartphone. And you had the buyer would take his money, and he would beam his money to the lawyer's phone. So think of that as like an escrow. They sign all the papers. Everybody's happy. Now the seller holds up his phone, and the lawyer beams the money to the seller. And now he's got his money, and it's in Bitcoin. And if he wants to, with me, if somebody sends me a bunch of Bitcoin with one click, I can convert it, just like PayPal. I can convert it to dollars in my bank account. So just that easy. So I mean, that is how this is being used. This is being used for very large transactions, and it's being used for very, very small transactions. So that's one use case. I want to talk about black markets for a minute. Okay? So a lot of us don't have that much of a problem with black markets, philosophically. But this is another one of these things that kind of reminds me of 1993, because I remember when I would tell people, sometimes I use the word internet in 1993, and tell me if anybody else has had this experience back in 1993. You'd say the internet, and somebody would say, "Oh, the internet. You're on the internet? I thought that was just for perverts." Right? Remember that? That's just for people. That's just for people watching porn and these child molesters that hang out in these chat rooms. Right? Yeah. That's all the internet was. Right? 1993. That's all anybody thought that it was. And of course, and here's what I discovered about that: the more you tried to tell people that it wasn't, that no other things were going on the internet, the more you started to sound like a pervert. So I stopped, trying to tell people. So up until just a few months ago, I couldn't read a story on the internet about Bitcoin without having most of the article devoted to. Does anybody want to say what it was? What was the big black market thing on Silk Road? Who said Silk Road? So Silk Road was kind of like the eBay of heroin. Okay, if you had whatever kind of drug you wanted, you could go on this. You had to use a special browser to get to it. Tor browser, which is kind of an interesting thing all by itself. It's like this is kind of known as the dark internet or the dark web. Okay, so you go to the dark side, and you could buy yourself some heroin, and it would just show you'd send Bitcoin because that was the currency you used because it's untraceable and it's anonymous. Nobody knows where it came from or where it went to, and you didn't care as long as your heroin showed up, and that was it. So what happened was that got taken down because the guy who was running it was a security moron. He was a brilliant guy, but he was a security moron. He deserved to get taken down, probably, and not probably. I mean, I don't condone that kind of thing. But the point is that this kind of allows things that the government isn't happy with. Okay, and I heard somebody say, and I got to agree with this: if you can't use your currency to buy things the government thinks is illegal, then that currency isn't worth a damn. So, because it seems like more and more things are becoming more illegal. So I'm in a business that takes credit cards, and I'm sure a lot of people here in this restaurant, we take credit cards. You guys know what the fee is on a credit card? Okay.
2%, 1.8, 2.7.
It's a lot. It's pushing 3%, maybe over 3%. That's a lot of money. Okay, on the aggregate, a lot of businesses have a profit margin thinner than that fee, depending on what your business is. Okay, so with Bitcoin, the fees are so low they're almost inconsequential. Now, here's the problem. So Overstock.com accepts Bitcoins. So if you guys are looking at Bitcoin on a regular basis, you're going to see the value of it. It's very, very volatile. It's very volatile because even though it's not a stock, it's kind of acting like a small cap, almost like a penny stock. So if anybody's ever traded penny stocks are the most volatile stocks there are because it's a very small base. So it doesn't take very much trading to really send that price kind of wild. Okay, and a lot of companies we're familiar with today were at one point very, very small. And probably Apple or Microsoft, some of these gigantic companies now, maybe I don't know if they were penny stocks, but they were smaller. And the smaller they are, the smaller that base, the more volatile they are. The bigger that base, the less volatile they are. Okay, so Bitcoin, as it grows and grows and grows, and it is growing, and I can probably take some questions about that. It's going to become less volatile over time. So one of the things people say often to me is they say, well, how could this currency be useful to any retailer if it's this crazy? So there are companies that actually have solved this problem. One of them is called BitPay, another one's called Coinbase. And so what I think it was Coinbase did the deal with Overstock.com. Here's the way it works. If I buy $100 worth of something on Overstock.com, and I pay with Bitcoin, that payment goes through Coinbase, which is just kind of like a credit card company, except they only charge 1%. Okay? And they will instantaneously, dynamically convert that to dollars. So I pay $100, Overstock gets $99 instantly. I mean, that's just how much you get. So that's the way that works. So that's how you can deal with that volatility problem. And over time, that's not going to be needed because I think at some point in the future, this is going to become less volatile. I think at some point in the future, the U.S. dollar is going to become more volatile, and you are going to see those lines cross very, very much like I was saying earlier about first-class mail. See how this goes around? What goes around comes around here. So we're kind of deja vu all over again. We have trends that I think are pretty clearly established at this point. And I see a very, very shaky future for the U.S. dollar because I believe that it's mortally wounded because of the monetary policy of the Fed. And we have something that is going to overtake it that fundamentally is quite sound, mathematically very, very sound. It has all the qualities of a sound money and none of the detriments, okay? So the last part of my presentation I want to touch on here is the word regulation, because everybody talks about it. If you've heard anything about Bitcoin, by the way, I'm just kind of curious. I forgot to do this at the beginning. How many of you have heard of Bitcoin prior to this presentation? So, okay, how many could raise your hand if I'd asked that question 6 months ago? Really? What about a year ago? Okay, very few. Wow, okay, that's pretty good. I'm really actually quite impressed, because most people, when I talk about this, a lot of people are like, what? Bitcoin? Whatever it is. So here's the thing about regulation. A lot of talk about Bitcoin. The government is freaking out over this. They can't control it. They can't kill it. They know that they weren't successful with BitTorrent. This thing is an absolute wrecking machine because it's hitting them where they're the most vulnerable. And that's why I say this is a pinprick to the heart of the state. Because this thing has the potential, if people start earning their money in Bitcoin, the government has no idea they're earning it. They have no idea they're getting it. Okay? So remember what I said earlier? This is Karate Kid time. You guys ready? So this is where it all comes together. All right? So you remember we had that kente cloth guy in Africa, okay, where you could transmit money to him anywhere in the world? What if you were that guy? What if you were an architect and you do work on buildings? You've got all the equipment, and you can lay out the plans for a building or part of a building that's in Singapore, and you live here. Well, you just create an income stream there, and the government's going to have, I'm not telling you not to pay your taxes, not exactly, okay? You should all do your thing, okay? They say it's a voluntary system. Well, I guess we're going to find out just how voluntary it is, because you can earn this money. See, prior to this, I can guarantee you, practically, if you were driving around today, every landscaper that you passed, they're getting, a lot of them getting paid cash, okay? A lot of people are getting paid cash, and I guarantee you they're not reporting it, okay? That segment of I would applaud that too. That segment of our population, whether you like this idea or you hate this idea, the reality of the situation is you're going to see a growing sector of people who have services to sell that can sell them internationally. They're going to be getting paid in Bitcoin. They're going to be getting paid. They might be even local. They might even be landscapers in a couple of years. People are going to figure out ways to earn money in Bitcoin and hide behind it to where they never pay taxes on it. I totally agree with this, because this is going to bring the pressure that let me digress for a minute here, because this kind of makes me a little insane. We have the 16th Amendment, which is the income, which we celebrate tomorrow. It's like a national holiday, right? It makes me sick. All right? So, it seems to me, and I've actually checked this with a couple legal scholars, a couple of them you guys know, and one in particular. And I said, it just seems to me that the 16th Amendment, whenever the first tax evasion cases came to the Supreme Court should have said, yep, you got your income tax, it's legal for you to charge an income tax, but the 16th Amendment didn't nullify the 4th Amendment, where people have the right to be secure in their papers, their personal privacy, et cetera, and it didn't nullify the 5th Amendment, so you can't compel them to sign a tax return. So good luck collecting your income tax. That's what they should have done. They should have said, yep, you got your income tax, but it's going to be impossible for you to collect it. That's what should have happened. Let me tell you what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin gets us our 4th Amendment back. Think about it. They don't know who's making what. They're not in right now. The government would have you believe there are two things. They would have you believe, especially in the wake of this NSA thing, they would have you believe that they're omniscient, that they know absolutely everything you do. If you think that, that's what they want you to think. To a large extent, it's true. Certainly on an individual basis. If they wanted to make a project out of you, they could know a lot more about you than you're comfortable with. But in the aggregate, they're not omniscient, but they want you to think that. The other thing they want you to think about is that they're omnipotent, that they have all power. Okay? What do you call an entity that's omniscient and omnipotent? Okay? What does that tell you about their motivation? That's what they want to be. They want to be God. Well, I got news for you. This God, small g, is going to get his head handed to him, because people are going to be able to use this kind of technology to get around that. Let me give you one other little use case that I think is going to be among the first things that people do. Let's talk about the estate tax, which I think is by far, is immoral and horrible as I think the income tax is. The estate tax makes me absolutely sick, because this is money that people have already paid taxes on. Okay? So if you have a net worth over X amount of dollars, whatever that is, a very significant part of your estate, especially if you got a family business, you're going to have to liquidate the estate. You can't pass the estate on to your, whatever the business is. It's very difficult, without some real complicated legal legerdemain, it's very difficult to pass an intact business down to the next generation, because you have to sell the business to liquidate it, to pay the taxes. Okay? And this business was built on money that you paid after you paid your taxes. So it's awful. So let me tell you what's going to start to happen. People are going to start, when they're getting up in their ages, they're going to go ahead and sell their business. And they're going to liquidate it. And I can tell you, I could have, if I had $1 million in my checking account right now, which, by the way, I don't, with one click, I can convert that to Bitcoin. And once I convert it to Bitcoin, I can send it to any Bitcoin address anywhere in the world. And if I'm some guy who's terminally ill and I've got this business and I liquidate my assets, what are they going to do? There's nothing illegal about that. They're going to put the dying guy in jail. I mean, I haven't violated any laws. I can send that, and they'll have no idea where I could have sent. I could have sent that money to the Hare Krishnas, and they would have no idea. Or I could have sent it to my relatives. That's the point. So you're going to see a large amount of stuff that would otherwise have gone into the estate tax. It is going to go poof right into the ether, and only the rightful people are going to get it. Okay? So that's another one of those use cases. I think, let me see if I have any other use cases. Estate tax, that's gone. Income tax is going to be a nightmare for these guys. My contention is that the federal government cannot regulate Bitcoin no more than they can regulate. If Congress passed a law tomorrow that said it shall no longer be cold in Chicago in the wintertime, it's not going to happen. The weather's... Yeah, so I wouldn't say, I wouldn't be surprised if they got one of those. Okay, so point is they can't regulate Bitcoin. They can't touch the protocol, but what they can do is they can regulate you. They can make you miserable. Okay, and they probably will for some period of time. But I think at some point it's going to be kind of like I talked about earlier with the BitTorrent thing. I think there's going to be some kind of coexistence for a while, and I think especially as you see, Bitcoin is devouring currencies one at a time, starting with the world's worst currencies. As bad as our currency is, it's actually one of the stronger currencies. There are a lot really awful currencies in the world. This was one of them. Okay, the Argentine peso is probably next on the hit list. A couple other really crappy currencies are going to be just completely devoured, and they're going to go the way they're going to be absorbed into technologies like Bitcoin. Let me see if I'm leaving anything else on the table. Ready for questions? Yeah, this is the last part of this. So when people discover they can send their money into the cloud like this, what you're going to see is you're going to see a whole new economy take off in there. You're going to see a lot of the financial services that we're used to in the real world are going to disappear into the cloud. So you're going to have the ability, I think, within a few years to buy insurance in Bitcoin. I don't see a lot of lending, by the way, being done in Bitcoin for reasons of volatility and so forth. But you're already seeing companies go public in Bitcoin in the cloud, because all these things can be controlled mathematically. I don't need a legal system if I can control things mathematically. So then you get into the area of smart contracts, where I can actually I can say, for instance, that I want X amount of dollars to be paid to this person's, to whoever this public Bitcoin address, okay, on his 18th birthday. And I can actually send the money, and on the person's 18th birthday, it goes into that account, into that public key. So there's so many amazing things you can do with this thing. It would take me forever today to go over all of them, but I hope I've given you just kind of a taste of where this thing can take us. Okay? Thank you. I know we're going to get a lot of questions. I'm going to try and be brief, if you guys can kind of be brief with the questions. Yeah, shoot.
What prevents Bitcoin from inflating infinitely? Can't you just build these bits and just make them go?
Yeah, great question. Okay, I like to answer that question by saying that, before I became such a zealot over this, I was the biggest skeptic you ever saw. And that's exactly what I was skeptic. Because remember what I said earlier about the three-eyed fish? Everybody always remembers the three-eyed fish story in the air. Is the day that Bitcoin is neither scarce or valuable it loses 100% of its value. So the people who maintain that code know that they're signing their death warrant if they were to tamper with the protocol. So the bottom line is that is controlled by the protocol. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins. We're about halfway there, and it's actually going down over time. The last Bitcoin will be issued sometime in the year 2140, and that is totally controlled by the press. All about the math. So no human being can hit a button and create like 1 million Bitcoins. Okay? Yeah.
So you mentioned that the government can't necessarily regulate it, but they can give you a hard time about it. Haven't they already started to do that?
Yeah, they have. And there's a lot of people who are in the Bitcoin community who want to be the business that, so for instance, a Bitcoin that touches Bitcoin but also wants to kind of bridge between you and Bitcoin. And this is a good example. This would be like an exchange, okay? Like the ill-fated Mt. Gox. I always like to remind people there was no bailout for Mt. Gox. It failed exactly the way it was supposed to fail. So companies that are trying to do that, they are going to be the ones who can be regulated. But it's very, I'm very careful to say they're not regulating Bitcoin. They're regulating that business. So yes, they can do that. And by the way, you know, we're very U.S.-centric in this country. There's the whole rest of the world out there that actually needs Bitcoin more than we do. And to the extent that we clamp down and make businesses and individuals miserable trying to use this new technology, it'd be the same as if they had clamped down on the internet in 1993. All of the advances that our country enjoyed as a result of that new economy being created would have happened elsewhere. So I don't know that they're going to learn that lesson or not, but that is the answer to your question. Yes, sure.
I guess kind of tied to Earl's question, since there is a finite amount of Bitcoin that can be created, how does that work? Obviously, it's fluid, and you kind of it's on a transactional basis to some degree. Is that right?
Well, that's the mechanism that creates new Bitcoins, but those are that's a measured. It's not variable, so it's in fact it's actually reducing by half every 4 years.
Okay, so then when you run out of Bitcoin,
yes,
what happens next?
Well, that's just really gets kind of cool because Bitcoin is divisible, or we say fungible, down to 8 decimal points. So what that means is, as more money goes into Bitcoin, the price of an individual Bitcoin goes up. So last time I checked, it was like $460 for a Bitcoin. Okay, so we've already started talking. It's kind of like the metric system. So you have like a meter, you got centimeters, and you got millimeters. As more money goes into it, Bitcoin could theoretically go to $100 million for a single Bitcoin, and the smallest unit would still be something I could buy a cup of coffee with. Okay, so you just keep on. So right now, instead of somebody asks me how much Bitcoin is, I can either say, well, it's $460 a Bitcoin, or I can say it's 46 cents a millibit. Okay, so kind of like millimeters. So that's the way. So we're just going to keep on, and if it moves another order of magnitude or two, like it has, then we'll be talking about microbits. Well, how much is that car? Oh, it's 100. It's 5,000 microbits. Okay. Yes. Next question. Oh, back there, right in back of the camera.
In light of all of the NSA crap, for lack of a better word, that has been discovered through the Snowden leaks, Bitcoin, BitTorrent, it's all anonymous. But if the NSA or other government agencies have access to your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, if RSA is colluding with the government in those keys and things like that, what is to secure any Bitcoin transaction or Bitcoin account?
So a couple answers to that. One is one of the things I really like about the Bitcoin protocol itself is that it's open source. And actually the most secure things are open source. So what open source means is rather than proprietary code like Microsoft or Apple would have in their programs, open source programs, people who know how to read computer code can actually read the source code. They can see if there's any funny business going in and they can certify it. So just like somebody could read French or German or Italian, people who are computer people can read that code and they can say, yes, this code is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's the most secure thing. So Bitcoin is actually built on that. So that's half of your answer. The other half of your answer is, if they're watching us, how do we know that we're working anonymously? So let me give you a use case scenario for that. Okay. So now I would also say that if they decide to make a project out of you for whatever reason, like for instance this guy Bundy out there in Nevada, they're going to be up with a power tool with this guy.
With Napster too, with individuals involved in Napster.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard for them. So So over time, I got a prediction for you. If you were to go back 5 or 6 years, if somebody told me then that you'd be able to go to Best Buy and buy a router, an internet router to plug into your home, your home Wi-Fi, if you were to tell me then that they were going to be able to sell those in a way that they'd be secure by default, I would have said that's impossible because they get it home and they plug it in, it wouldn't know how to work it because it took somebody who knew what they were doing to be able to make that work. But that happened, didn't it? Now you can actually do that. So if you fast forward, the trend line that I'm looking at is if you go 5 years in the future, especially because of the Snowden revelations, people are going to be encrypting up by default. So I mean, every email you send in 5 years, or every text that you send in 5 years, every phone call that you make is going to find a way to scramble the metadata and scramble the actual data of the call, of the email, etc. And when that happens, the internet is going to slowly go dark to these guys. If they wanted to throw $100 million worth of computing power at you, they could probably unravel your encryption. But they can't do that for the whole country. So the whole motivation for everybody is, as these tools come online, everybody please encrypt up, because then it makes it impossible for them to make a project out of anybody just by data mining. So, we're going to be getting better and better on that. For right now, I feel pretty safe. A couple little techniques. Even if you're not engaging in nefarious business, it's kind of cool to play around with this.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
All right. So I hope I answered your question.
So we'll go Matt, and then we'll go over there. So,
yeah, I can see it.
Companies pay in Bitcoin
Yeah.
and will be hidden from the IRS.
Yeah, there's a really good example. So one of the reasons, this is actually a pet peeve of mine. I don't buy stock in a company unless they pay dividends. There's a lot of reasons for that, but the biggest reason for that is dividends being paid is the best evidence that the company is healthy.
Yep.
If you are cooking your books and not paying dividends, you can go a long time. So we have the example, I guess, probably of Enron's a good example. I don't think it paid dividends. We have another example, Health South paid dividends, and they were cooking the books, but they weren't able to do it for very long because they ran out of money. Okay. Now, the reason we don't, if you're wondering why U.S. companies don't pay dividends, it's because of the tax code. It's more valuable to the shareholders to take their gains in capital gains because the taxes are lower. So this is why, if you wonder why all these companies don't pay dividends, that's why. But when you get into a company that's traded, that goes public on the internet, I'm sorry, in kind of the Bitcoin world, there's already a few of these, and they do pay dividends, and they pay them in Bitcoin. The one company that I'm familiar with, that actually went all the way from it fundraised in Bitcoin. Yeah, well, you can't really buy. I don't know if this one's actually gone back private now. It was called Satoshi Dice, and it was a gambling thing, and it went public in Bitcoin. It paid dividends in Bitcoin. So if you paid during the initial offering, they had your public key address, and that's the address they sent the dividends to. And then a couple of years went by, and an outside gaming company bought it, took it private, and everybody to their Bitcoin address got a fraction of that payoff, which was a huge payoff. And so so now we have seen a full life cycle all the way from going public, from basically an IPO, to paying dividends, to growth stage, to going private. Fascinating stuff. So you're going to see that. You're going to see companies. I talk to people all the time. We've got all kinds of ideas about companies. One little footnote to that is really cool. You guys know what Kickstarter is?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kickstarter, for those of you who don't know, you say, well, I got this cool idea for a concept. I need $50,000 to be able to bring this online. And if I make my $50,000 bogey, then I get the money. But if I don't, if I miss that bogey, then your credit card never gets charged. Okay, the technical word for that is an assurance contract. Guess what? That is actually built into the Bitcoin protocol. Now, it's not really being used yet, but within another year or two, as more and more development work gets done on that, you're going to be able to do that. People are going to be able to go public. They're going to say, we got this company, let's take a Bitcoin insurance company is a good example. But we need, in order to have critical mass, we need to raise the equivalent of $100 million worth of Bitcoin. And unless and until we hit that bogey, we're not an insurance company. So people can say, well, yeah, that sounds a good idea. I'll put $1,000 into that, okay, for whatever percent that buys me. But I know that unless they hit that bogey, my Bitcoin in 6 months will just return right back to my wallet. That's all mathematically controlled, no human beings necessary. Okay.
Matt Hesprick back here.
IRS issued on March 25th guidance that Bitcoin is property, not currency. Now, anyone that's familiar with civil asset forfeiture and the adversarial nature of that would be doing well to pay attention to the following next year or so of developments with the IRS and regulations surrounding property, such as virtual currency now. And if you're worried about that, I am taking Bitcoin donations on my website.
Okay. So let me give you the legal way to handle that problem, and let me give you the way that I think everybody is actually going to handle that problem. Number one, so for those of you kind of following this, what this means is, instead of the government is not considering Bitcoin a currency, they don't want to consider it currency because they're terrified of what it is and what it's going to do. So they're calling it property. So they're treating it like so if you bought Bitcoin at $100 and you sell it or buy something with it at $400, you got to pay capital gains on the difference. Okay. So what you're going to see now, there's a lot of people working on this, is on my phone I've got a wallet, a virtual wallet that has my Bitcoin on it. Okay. All the new versions of those wallets are going to track that. So if I want to play by the rules at the end of the year, it's going to give me exactly what that is. It's probably going to use last in, first out accounting. Okay. So for instance, like if the equivalent of this would be if I bought, let's say I bought gold routinely like every month for years, and some of it I bought at $800, and then others I bought like last week at like $1,300, and I go to spend some of it on something. Let's say I bought something with gold. Well, it would automatically use the last amount that I paid rather than the $800. So instead of paying a capital gains between $1,300, the current price, and $800, my earliest price, it would be between $1,300 and $1,300. So I think Bitcoin will work the same way. Okay, but that assumes they know you have it. So the other half of my answer is, if they don't know you have it, they can't tax it. I mean, there's just no way. Let me give you one little footnote to that. I actually talked to, quite by chance, at an architectural, I think it was, I guess that's where it was, a company. We actually kind of war game this out. If you're a German company and you have American employees and you're paying all these payroll taxes and things like that, theoretically, you could have the guy create two Bitcoin addresses, one that he reports, and the other one, let's call the 401k. All right? And if that money just goes and he never touches that money, you can't even argue that he has that money. It's just going to an address somewhere in the ether that nobody knows. You can't trace it to him. You don't know. And when the guy is 60 years old, he can go to, somewhere and buy, a load of gold with it if he wanted to. So, I mean, I think it's going to become increasingly hard for that to be traceable.
Well, let's do that. I read or heard, maybe it was a month ago, that one of the, I don't have my terminology down here, I think they were exchanges or something, got hacked and lots of people lost money.
Yeah. So
could you explain what that was all about and why that shouldn't be of concern to us?
So when you're a big, I don't like the term, but I guess I'm sort of a Bitcoin evangelist. So I'm, as I said, I torment my friends with this stuff all the time.
Do you bit torment your friends?
I bit torment my friends. Good one. So here's what happens. Whenever there's bad news on Bitcoin, I get like 1,000 emails. I get all these Facebook things. I told you so. Bitcoin's going down. And of course, a lot of people don't understand this thing. That was the equivalent of, you remember when Lehman went down the tubes? Okay, nobody looked in their wallet the next day and said, "Oh my God, my dollars are worthless." Okay, it was just some company that had something to do with the dollars that was in business that had a lot of problems. They went out of business. So Mt. Gox was, for those of you who don't know, that was an exchange. So it was one way that you could. They were in Japan. I could send $1,000 to Mt. Gox, and they give me $1,000 worth of bitcoins. So that's an exchange. They have a fee, and they were either a bunch of crooks or they were a bunch of incompetents, or I think both. Okay, everybody in the Bitcoin world knew that these were bad actors. Everybody. I've been in Bitcoin for about a year now. I'm telling you, I've never had a dime over there. Everybody I know stayed away from them. I don't know how anybody had any money in that organization, because everybody knew they were a bunch of Keystone cops over there. That's the other thing, is that banks, Bitcoin makes banks largely irrelevant. So the reason a lot of people kept money, because you keep money in there's no reason to trust a third party. The only reason some people was out of laziness, okay, or out of high frequency trading. So some people were doing some business and just found it convenient to leave it there and let them kind of be their wallet. Bad idea. So the bottom line is, Mt. Gox failed. It was not too big to fail. It couldn't be bailed out. That's a healthy thing. There's going to be many more of these kinds of businesses. One other thing that kind of drove me crazy, there was some other obscure exchange in Singapore that had a 30-something-year-old CEO, this woman who either committed suicide or some weird thing, and the papers internationally reported Bitcoin CEO commits suicide. So I got like 1 million emails saying, aha, I told you. So the Bitcoin CEO committed suicide. Something's going on here. I'm like, no. What they should have, what they should have said was CEO of a Bitcoin business committed suicide. So that's, so.
So just in summary, what you're saying is that those exchanges aren't necessary. We don't have to leave our money, unlike a traditional bank, which are kind of necessary.
So I use Coinbase. I use Coinbase as kind of my exchange, Coinbase.com. So if you guys want to buy Bitcoin, there's 2 ways to get it. There's a fun way and there's a hard way. I'm sorry, there's a fun way, there's an easy way, and there's a fun way. The easy way is to go to Coinbase.com, establish an account there. It's all above board. It hooks up to your checking account just exactly like PayPal does. You can move money back and forth just like PayPal, right? That's the easy way. The fun way is you go to localbitcoins.com and you can buy Bitcoins for cash at a Starbucks from somebody who's selling Bitcoins. And that's actually, I've actually used that because I wanted to play with all these things. And I bought a lot of Bitcoin that way. So you bring, you know, you feel like you're doing, you kind of feel like you're some kind of a, you know, like a drug dealer or something. And it's really cool. So, you know, you hand this guy, you're at the Starbucks and you hand this guy a bunch of $100 bills. And then he takes his phone and you do this thing with your phone. You see this, you know, that's what's happening. Yeah. I'm sorry.
So I have a lot of points I'd like to discuss with you at a later time.
Sure.
But I'm going to keep it to the most pertinent one I think is relevant to this conversation, which is that there are lots of virtual currencies out there that are growing in popularity every day. Ever since Silk went down, they've grown exponentially. Mm-hmm. How do we know that this is going to be the one you're going to want to bet on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what you're talking about are alternative coins, otherwise known as altcoins. And so, yeah, Dogecoin is one, Litecoin is another one. And so the question is how do we know they're not going to overtake Bitcoin? The answer is I, for one, am a free market person. So I'm not afraid of competition. So if the only reason some coin will surpass Bitcoin is if it's significantly better. Now that's probably not going to be an overnight thing. And if it does, I'll be able to switch. If there's some advantage that it offers, we'll be able to switch. The fact that there's so many of them proliferating, if I wanted to create Bobcoin, I could actually probably create Bobcoin in about, because remember what I said earlier, the protocol is open source, okay? So the reason that's not going to happen is something called the network effect, okay? So let me give you an example. We all speak English in this room. If I decide that, you know, I want to improve upon English and I want to create English 2.0, and I'm going to change it, and, you know, maybe you can't understand it and things like that, but you can learn it, okay? It might be better than English 1.0, okay? But all the works of literature, all the culture, all the people who speak it all over the world is all in a different language. And so it has the network effect. So protocols and languages of protocol tend to be extremely, extremely sticky, and they tend to, if you're going to improve or change very incrementally over time. So for instance, Tim, you're in the email business. What was the protocol that we used for email 20 years ago? SMT. What's the protocol we use for email today? Okay, I rest my case. So it's an updated version of it. So what's more likely is the one that has the network effect, which is currently Bitcoin. That is a huge advantage. So it would be very similar to towards the end of the fax machine era. I don't know if anybody still has a fax machine, okay, or would admit to having a fax machine. Right, but let's stick with the fax machine. Let's say I invented a fax machine that was 10 times better than any fax machine that was out there, okay, but it worked on a different protocol. It didn't communicate with any other fax machines except its own. You see the problem you have? So no matter how good it is on an individual basis, if it doesn't have the network effect, it is almost useless. And as long as Bitcoin has an update path, which it does, it's just like any other open source software. You have a consortium of people always willing to adopt whatever the new version is, and as long as that doesn't violate any core principles, it will always marginally improve. Okay?
You have a situation where you have PayPal. You can't buy Bitcoin with PayPal, but you can buy Litecoin with PayPal, and then exchange your Litecoin for Bitcoin on one of the exchanges.
Well, I didn't know you could buy Litecoin with PayPal, but that actually gives me another way. Something I was going to mention is that if you're ever trying to hide your Bitcoin, you can use those altcoins. You can go in, so I can take like $10,000 worth of Bitcoin, I could buy $10,000 worth of Litecoin and then buy my Bitcoin back, and there'd be no connection between those two. So that's one of the use cases for altcoins. Okay.
Hey, I love Bitcoins and everything about it. We just hit a million transactions, or no, million accounts, I think, the wallet accounts. And I was looking at how much data it's been consuming. It's around 15 gigabytes at this point. But my biggest concern right now, and deep in the future, like 5 years to 10 years, the blockchain protocol probably be 500 gigabytes,
right.
1,000 gigabytes, and that will take forever to download, like, for the entire blockchain. Is there any solution to?
Yeah, there's two. That's a little technical for this audience, but I'll answer it. So there's two ways to deal with that. One is you're going to have much. We're seeing Moore's law kind of works a little bit in. Well, actually, Brian, this is kind of your area. Data storage 5 years from now going to be more plentiful than it is now? So that's one thing. So it's very likely it's going to be cheaper and more plentiful. The second answer to your question is the Bitcoin blockchain was created in such a way that you could prune off a lot of the data and still have the integrity of the blockchain. You also have the ability to have half nodes in there. You have half nodes and super nodes, which don't require all that data. So there are workarounds. That was all pretty much engineered from the beginning. I don't know if it's perfect or not, but you also, I'm not nobody that I know that understands the technology of that is really worried about that right now. So that's the best answer I can give to you.
All right, so we'll go to Jeannie and then Michelle, and Michelle has the last question.
Okay.
Okay, I don't quite get why there's a finite end to the Bitcoin in the year 2140. And as a concomitant to that, would that not enter those alternate coins? Would those not take over?
Well, essentially, this is kind of mimicking gold. So the idea is that even if we had all the Bitcoins that were ever going to be in existence today, it would still be extremely useful. It would just keep going up in value, but we just keep on moving the decimal point lower and lower. So instead of dealing in full Bitcoins, we'd be dealing in micro coins or in microbits, whatever it is. So it's not required to have more individual units. It's just that as more money goes into it and the value of individual Bitcoin goes up, kind of like gold, okay, you can always fractionalize it down. So really, it was built to be kind of mimic gold in the sense that when the pioneers first got to California, for instance, they could take flakes and nuggets out of the riverbeds. It was incredibly easy to get, okay? And so they prospected on that. Now you got to do all kinds of mining to get the same amount of gold. So it gets progressively harder, and at some point it gets to the point where it's almost impossible to get new gold, and that is kind of where Bitcoin is designed to go in 100 and some years.
I just thought that date seemed kind of arbitrary.
It is arbitrary. The intention is to have enough units out there for a very long life, but also more importantly to bring the supply on very incrementally, so that you don't have a situation like the Federal Reserves and quite where it's actually getting rarer and rarer as time goes on. Just exactly the way gold is. Gold gets progressively harder to mine. So does Bitcoin.
So Michelle, now do the.
Oh yeah, no pressure. So listen, the new pastels are trending at the Limited. So if I go there at thelimited.com and I want to buy a blouse, I don't have to think about the Federal Reserve or the fees on credit cards or anything else. I just buy the blouse.
Right.
And I'm wondering, based on your obviously intimate knowledge, if you were to take a stab, how far away are we from me being able to utilize Bitcoin without thinking about the background math or anything else going on and just being able to make that purchase, here's key, with confidence?
Yeah, I love the question. My answer to your question is 2 years. Okay, so I believe that within about 2 years, you're going to be able to do that. You can already do part of that now. So let me tell you what I can do now with my Bitcoin wallet. When I look, so if I had Bitcoin, I've actually moved a lot of my Bitcoin offline to cold storage, whole other talk. Okay, let's say I had $1,000 worth of Bitcoin on here. Let's say that I had one Bitcoin on here. Okay, that's $460 worth of Bitcoin right now. No matter what country I'm in, I can set my wallet to display my value in Bitcoin in my local currency. So obviously I live in the United States of America, so I would set it on dollars. So I'd be looking at my wallet and it would say, you got $460 worth of Bitcoin in your wallet. Okay. If I was in the UK, it would say, you've got 280 pounds. If I was in, Europe, somewhere else, it's on the euro, it would tell me in that currency, whatever currency I'm in. So for the foreseeable future, we're going to be norming these for the currency that we're most familiar with. So I deal in dollars. So if I go to overstock.com, which I can today, I'm going to buy something in dollars, but the transaction will occur in Bitcoin behind the scenes. And that's exactly what you said a moment ago, is you don't want to have to do the math. Well, you don't have to, and you don't have to do that right now.
The technology's already there.
Yeah, that part of the technology is already there. So the larger question is when is the retailer that I like to do business with going to be doing business in Bitcoin? And that's my 2-year answer. I think that Amazon, my guess, this time next year. So here's some predictions. This is kind of fun to do. This time next year, Amazon will be online. In fact, I can actually buy stuff from Amazon with Bitcoin right now. I can buy a gift card, gyft.com, sells all these gift cards. Every restaurant you've ever heard of, Amazon, all kinds of different businesses, Cabela's, and I can and I have used Bitcoin to buy those gift cards, and then I can use them online, or I can use them at the gas pump, or whatever, however I'm going to do that. So, and think of the implications of that. If I had some stream of income in Bitcoin from abroad, okay, from something I was selling, I could actually spend that money, and nobody would know who's doing the spending.
I love you, Bob.
That's a great place to end. Thank you all very much.